My mother and sister attacked my daughter and thought I wouldn't find out, so I put them in jail. My name is Edgar Whitmore, and if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be testifying against my own sister and mother in court, I'd have called them delusional. But the truth has a way of tearing through denial like a structural failure under strain, sudden, catastrophic, and utterly revealing. I'm 38 years old, a senior structural engineer at a respected firm in downtown Chicago. I've spent my entire adult life building things that last: bridges, high-rises, flood mitigation systems. I specialize in making the invisible strong, ensuring that even what can't be seen supports the weight of everything above it. I used to think families worked the same way. My wife, Lorraine, is 35. She's the director of a pharmaceutical research team, someone you'd describe as calm under pressure, warm but measured. We've been together for 15 years, married for 12. Our daughter, Celeste, just turned 14. She's got Lorraine's thoughtfulness and my need to understand how the world works. Bright, observant, artistic. She's one of those kids who picks up on every shift in tone, every hesitation in a conversation. You can't hide much from her even when you think you're being subtle. We live in a comfortable 3-bedroom condo not far from the river. Nothing ostentatious. It's the product of years of effort, budgeting, compromise, and shared goals. We have what we have because we planned, sacrificed, and held each other up when things got hard. But no matter how successful we became, I never left behind the people who raised me, even when they made it nearly impossible to stay close. I grew up in a small town outside Detroit. Our neighborhood was one of those blue-collar communities built around a single employer. For us, it was the Hartley Automotive Plant. My dad worked there for over 2 decades before he was laid off in a round of brutal downsizing. The day he came home with a cardboard box instead of a lunch pail is still burned into my memory. He never really recovered. He was in his 40s and suddenly obsolete. The only work he could find afterward was part-time retail manual labor for minimum wage. My mother, Beatrice, started cleaning houses full-time. She never complained out loud, but her silences said everything. Every wrinkle on their faces, every extra shift, was like a warning: this is what happens when the world decides you no longer matter. I saw it and made a choice early: I would never be vulnerable like that. In high school, while other kids went to parties or watched television, I taught myself drafting software and pored over architecture books. I was good at math, but more than that, I was obsessed with the hidden skeletons of things: what held buildings upright, what made bridges safe. When I told my high school guidance counselor I wanted to be an engineer, he didn't even try to hide his skepticism. "College costs money, Edgar," he said with a smile that barely veiled his judgment. "Maybe start with something more realistic." But I wasn't deterred. I got a scholarship to Great Lakes Polytechnic and spent every summer working construction jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. I lived in a shared apartment with 3 roommates, cooked pasta 6 nights a week, and took every freelance drafting gig I could find. By the time I graduated, I had job offers waiting. Not everyone was happy about my success, though. My younger sister, Marlene, has always had a complicated relationship with me. She's 36 now, divorced, no children, and bitter in ways she doesn't even try to hide. Growing up, she was the favorite, at least from my point of view. New clothes every school year, a car on her 16th birthday. Meanwhile, I wore hand-me-downs and rode a second-hand bike. After college, when I came back home with my degree and a job lined up, Marlene's attitude toward me hardened. It was as if my success confirmed all her worst fears, that she'd been left behind. And it didn't help that Lorraine was the kind of woman who made it look effortless. Educated, poised, kind. Everything Marlene wished she could be, or at least, that's what she told herself. Still, I didn't hold her resentment against her. I wanted to believe that people changed. Over the years, I supported her in every way I could. When her marriage collapsed and she was left with nothing but debts and anxiety, I paid her rent for 6 months. When her car broke down, I bought her a new one, a reliable, modest SUV. When she was out of work, I introduced her to people in my network, trying to help her get back on her feet. As for my mother, Beatrice, well, I paid her condo fees when she couldn't. I made sure she never had to worry about groceries or utilities. I sent her birthday flowers every year, and when she fell and injured her hip 2 years ago, I was the one who coordinated with the home nurse and covered what insurance wouldn't. And what did I get in return? Not gratitude. Not even politeness. Instead, Marlene would find little ways to undermine me. She'd make offhand remarks about Lorraine being too perfect or insinuate that our financial stability was a fluke. During family dinners, she'd drop comments like, "Must be nice to have everything handed to you," knowing full well that nothing had been. At Thanksgiving last year, she knocked a glass of red wine onto Lorraine's new dress and muttered, "Some people have wardrobes that can afford accidents." At Celeste's school performance, she cornered Lorraine and spent 15 minutes lecturing her on how working mothers lose emotional bonds with their children. And then there was my mother. Beatrice never stepped in. Never said, "That's enough." If anything, she encouraged it, sometimes even chuckling at Marlene's jabs, like they were just harmless jokes. It wore Lorraine down, slowly and quietly. But she never complained. She just smiled and excused herself from the room when things got tense. Looking back now, I realize I underestimated just how deep their resentment ran. 2 weeks before Celeste's birthday, Marlene called me out of the blue. She sounded chipper, too chipper. Asked about our condo's address, the guest list, what kind of decorations we were putting up, what kind of gifts Celeste liked. At the time, I chalked it up to her finally taking an interest. Maybe, I thought, she was trying to be part of the family again. I wish I'd trusted my instincts. Celeste's birthday fell on a Saturday. Lorraine and I spent the day decorating and baking. Celeste invited a handful of her closest friends. Around 1:30, the girls were laughing in the living room, music playing softly, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a few hours, everything felt light, hopeful. Then, at exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. And with it came the beginning of the end. Marlene stepped into our condo with a kind of theatrical flair, her heels clicking deliberately against the floorboards. She wore a designer coat, one I recognized from a luxury boutique on Michigan Avenue, and her hair was styled as if she were attending a gala, not a child's birthday party. Beatrice followed behind her, dressed in pale blue, her expression unreadable except for the slight raise of her eyebrows as she scanned our living room. "Happy birthday to my favorite girl," Beatrice announced, her voice overly loud, as if she were performing. She handed Celeste an envelope, almost certainly a $50 check, her tradition, unchanged for years. Marlene approached next, holding a small, meticulously wrapped box tied with satin ribbon. "This one's from me and Mom," she said. "We picked it out just for you." Celeste, always polite, thanked them and accepted the gift. I was just finishing setting out extra plates near the cake when something about Marlene's expression caught my attention. She looked anticipatory, as if waiting for a specific reaction. "Where'd you get that?" I asked her, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh, just a boutique downtown," she said with a slight shrug, almost too fast. Before I could press further, Celeste had already begun untying the ribbon. She peeled away the paper, revealing a small jewelry box. Inside was a slender silver bracelet adorned with tiny charms, stars, moons, and a central heart-shaped bead. It looked innocent enough, even charming. "It's beautiful," Celeste said, slipping it onto her wrist. "Thank you, Aunt Marlene." "Thank you, Grandma." But no sooner had she latched the clasp than everything changed. Celeste's smile vanished. Her eyes went wide, pupils shrinking rapidly. Her shoulders tensed, hands trembling. I called out her name, but she didn't respond. Then her knees buckled. Lorraine was at her side in seconds, catching her before she hit the ground. Celeste's body went rigid. Her arms jerked, her head snapped back. A choked sound escaped her lips as she began to convulse. "Call an ambulance," Lorraine cried. I already had my phone in hand. "My daughter is having a seizure," I told the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's unconscious, unresponsive, and convulsing. We need help now." Celeste's friends stood frozen in horror. Lorraine laid her gently on her side, cushioning her head with a pillow. As I knelt beside them, my eyes fell on the bracelet. One of the charms, the heart, was emitting faint, rapid flashes of light. Subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking directly at it. I'm not a medical professional, but I know engineering, and that wasn't a design accident. Celeste's seizure lasted nearly 2 minutes. Her breathing was shallow, her lips tinged a bluish hue. Every second felt like an eternity. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed her, loaded her onto a stretcher, and began administering treatment as they transported her to the hospital. Lorraine rode with her in the ambulance. I drove behind them, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, heart pounding like thunder in my ears. At the hospital, Celeste was rushed into a treatment room. I found Lorraine pacing in the hallway, her face pale, hands trembling. "Something was wrong with that bracelet," she said before I could speak. "I know," I replied. "I saw it too," one of the charms was flashing light. Subtle, like a strobe. We sat together in silence until a doctor finally approached us. "She had a photosensitive epileptic seizure," he explained. "Triggered by rhythmic light patterns. It's rare but not unheard of in adolescents, especially if they've never shown symptoms before. We've stabilized her and are running scans." "What about the bracelet?" I asked. The doctor paused. "We're having it examined. One of our technicians flagged it. There's a small electronic component inside, something that shouldn't be present in jewelry.
It appears to emit light pulses when in motion. My breath caught. Lorraine's face fell. Could it have caused the seizure?
We believe so, the doctor said. The flashing frequency is within the range known to trigger seizures in sensitive individuals.
We've contacted the authorities. I nodded slowly. My mind wasn't spinning, it was sharpening.
Everything Marlene had done in the past, all the jabs and resentments, had led to this moment.
The calculated questions she'd asked about the party. Her demeanor when she handed Celeste the gift.
The satisfaction in her eyes.
I didn't want to believe it.
But there it was.
Police officers arrived within the hour.
They took our statements and collected the bracelet for forensic analysis. Marlene and Beatrice were still at the condo when they were contacted and asked to come to the hospital for questioning.
They arrived looking perturbed, not panicked. How is Celeste? Marlene asked, her voice tight.
She's alive, I replied flatly. Marlene attempted to sit near Lorraine, who stood immediately and moved to my side.
Don't, Lorraine said. Don't pretend you care. What are you implying? Beatrice interjected. This is a misunderstanding. She almost died, I said. From a bracelet you gave her.
A bracelet with a device inside it. A flashing light designed to trigger a seizure.
That's ridiculous, Marlene said. It was just a gift. We bought it from a store. The store's name, the officer beside us asked, flipping open his notebook. Marlene hesitated.
Exactly, Lorraine said under her breath. The doctors continued their evaluations, and Celeste eventually regained consciousness. She was groggy, confused, but responsive. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, silently vowing I would never let anything like this happen to her again.
Later that evening, the hospital's biomedical technician confirmed the worst.
The device was engineered, he told us.
It's not something you'd find in retail jewelry. Someone intentionally embedded it.
It's programmable, emits rhythmic flashes, and was set to activate when moved.
Meaning someone knew what it would do, I said.
Yes, he said simply.
This wasn't an accident. The hospital corridor felt colder that night.
Every surface sterile, white, buzzing faintly with overhead lights seemed to press inward.
Lorraine stood beside me while I signed the consent forms for Celeste to remain overnight for observation.
The doctors reassured us there would be no lasting physical damage, but emotionally, something had changed in all of us. I had always assumed the distance I kept from Marlene and Beatrice was a form of healthy boundaries. Now I realized it had been denial, willful blindness to how dangerous bitterness can become when it festers unchecked. The next morning, Detective Jerome Hensley, a seasoned investigator with quiet eyes and a deliberate manner, sat down with Lorraine and me in a quiet conference room.
We've confirmed the bracelet was custom modified, he said, sliding over a printed schematic of the internal mechanism.
The light pulses fall directly within the frequency range that triggers photosensitive seizures.
This wasn't manufactured in error. It was purposeful. Can you trace where it came from? I asked. We're working on that.
Your sister claims she bought it from a boutique, but can't recall the name. There's no purchase on her credit card that matches the description, and none of the local stores we contacted carry anything remotely similar. Then it was made, Lorraine said quietly.
Detective Hensley nodded. We've subpoenaed her phone records and emails. If she contacted someone to make this, we'll find it. I leaned forward. And my mother? He didn't answer right away. Your sister's behavior is clearly premeditated. As for Mrs. Whitmore, that's more complicated.
But if she knew about the device's function and still gave it to your daughter, that's conspiracy.
At minimum, accessory to a felony. Lorraine looked at me.
Her face, pale but resolute, told me she was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't about anger anymore.
This was about protecting Celeste, about making sure those responsible were held fully accountable.
Later that afternoon, the detective returned to update us.
We have a break. We traced a money order linked to Marlene, used to pay someone on an electronics repair forum. She described what she needed: a flashing light device that could be embedded into jewelry.
The person she contacted was suspicious enough to save the emails and keep the specifications.
My stomach turned. She planned this.
She planned this, down to the frequency of the light.
Yes, he said. And it gets worse.
The technician told us Marlene said it was for a harmless prank, something to scare a spoiled teenager into humility.
That technician is now cooperating with our investigation. That evening, Marlene was brought in for formal questioning.
Lorraine and I were allowed to watch from a separate room behind mirrored glass. Marlene sat at the table, her posture confident at first. She wore the same expensive coat from the party, but her hair was undone, her eyes darker beneath. Detective Hensley entered calmly, placed a file on the table, and said, "You lied about where the bracelet came from."
"We've spoken to the technician you paid to embed the device. He gave us everything. The emails. The payment trail. Even the prototype schematics."
For the first few minutes, Marlene deflected.
It wasn't meant to hurt her.
It was a prank, just something to get their attention. You don't understand how smug they are. How they flaunt their life like it's perfect.
Her voice cracked. "They think they're so much better than me. Lorraine with her calm voice and expensive handbags. Edgar with his good job and perfect family. Celeste is a child," the detective said, voice low. "You targeted a child. She's not a saint." Marlene snapped. "Everyone acts like she's the golden girl. I wanted to shake them. I didn't think she'd actually get hurt."
Her eyes brimmed with tears. She shook her head, but the defiance returned quickly.
"They had it coming. All I ever wanted was for them to feel what I feel. Just once."
There it was, the raw, bitter truth. Later that night, after Marlene was formally charged, Beatrice was brought in for questioning.
"I didn't want to be there.
I thought I had no room left to be shocked, but when I heard what my mother said behind that mirrored glass, something inside me finally broke.
I thought it was just a silly light," she said.
Marlene told me it would just give Celeste a startle. She said it would teach her not to take gifts for granted.
I didn't know it could hurt her."
"Did you ask what kind of light?" the detective asked.
Beatrice hesitated.
"No," she admitted. "But I trusted Marlene. She always said Edgar and Lorraine needed to be taken down a peg." The room fell silent. "You handed a child a weapon," the detective said softly. "And watched her collapse.
Then you laughed."
"I was nervous," as Beatrice said, voice thin.
"It was a reaction. I didn't mean it the way it looked."
"They arrested her that night. Not in cuffs, but under escort. I watched as my mother, the woman who once walked me to school and stayed up with me when I had the flu, signed her name on the record of conspiracy to harm her own granddaughter. The charges were clear: aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and child endangerment for Marlene. For Beatrice, accessory to a felony, and failure to report intent to harm. The DA made it clear this would not be quietly resolved.
Over the next few days, Lorraine and I worked with our family lawyer to draft protective orders.
I didn't want Marlene or Beatrice anywhere near Celeste again. We filed for civil action as well, one that included medical costs, trauma therapy, and punitive damages. Every step was a battle, but one we were prepared to fight. A week after Marlene's arrest, the press caught wind of the case. A few headlines called it the jewelry prank that turned criminal, but those headlines missed the essence.
This wasn't a prank. This was betrayal, fueled by envy, carried out with methodical precision.
And worst of all, it had nearly taken away the most important person in my life. The courthouse sat like a stone sentinel against the January sky, gray, heavy, unblinking.
Lorraine and I arrived early that morning, walking side by side through the cold.
The air tasted metallic, and every sound, from footsteps on concrete to the rustle of winter coats, felt amplified, sharp. We weren't just here for justice. We were here to draw a line.
Marlene's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp.
Lorraine and I sat quietly in the first row of the gallery, hands clasped. Behind us, a scattering of reporters and curious observers had gathered, some taking notes, some whispering.
But I barely noticed them.
All I could focus on was the door through which Marlene would enter. When she finally did, wearing an orange jumpsuit and escorted by 2 deputies, I saw a different woman than the one who had handed Celeste that box. Gone was the glossy hair, the designer coat, the smug confidence. Her face was pale, hollow. She didn't look at us, not once. The prosecutor opened with clarity and calm. "Your Honor, this is not a case of misunderstanding.
This is not a prank gone wrong. This is a calculated, deliberate act of harm.
The defendant commissioned a custom device designed to trigger a seizure in a child. She then embedded that device in a bracelet and presented it at a family gathering under the guise of a birthday gift.
Her confession is clear. Her actions are premeditated. This court must treat them as such."
Marlene's defense attorney, a court-appointed woman who looked tired but competent, argued that her client had no criminal history, strong community ties, and was experiencing mental strain due to familial pressures. She did not intend permanent harm, the attorney said.
She wanted to disrupt, not destroy.
But the judge, a tall man with steel gray hair and a low, even voice, was unmoved.
"Intent is clear when preparation is deliberate," he said. No bail. Remand until trial. Marlene was escorted out.
Still, she never looked our way.
The next day, Beatrice's hearing took place in the same room.
She arrived in civilian clothes, her posture tentative, her face aged overnight. I watched her fingers tremble as she adjusted her coat. Her attorney, a polished man with a silver pen and a defensive tone, painted her as an elderly woman manipulated by her daughter.
She did not participate in the technical aspects of this act. She did not program the device.
Her crime, if any, lies in poor judgment, not malice. But then the prosecutor played the recording from her interview at the hospital. I thought it would just scare her, Beatrice had said.
She'd be fine. And then the prosecutor paused the tape, looked directly at the judge, and said, "What kind of grandmother hands her granddaughter a time bomb and calls it humbling?" Beatrice was sentenced to house arrest and 3 years probation, along with mandatory psychiatric counseling. The judge's closing statement still echoes in my mind.
As a grandparent, your responsibility is to nurture, not wound.
This court does not take kindly to betrayal disguised as parenting. After the hearings, Lorraine and I filed the civil suit. It wasn't about money, it was about accountability.
The therapist Celeste had started seeing said naming the harm was the first step in healing from it. The civil case allowed us to name it for what it was. Our attorney, Melvin Cartwright, was a former federal prosecutor turned private litigator.
Calm, methodical, sharp as a scalpel.
He broke down the case into what he called the pillars of harm: emotional trauma, medical cost, reputational risk, and psychological distress. Not only was your daughter physically harmed, he explained, she will carry the emotional scars of betrayal into adulthood. The court must recognize the impact of familial treachery. We submitted medical reports, therapist notes, and expert testimony from the biomedical engineer who had dissected the bracelet.
Marlene's emails with the electronics technician were printed and submitted, her words cold, casual, and exact.
"Needs to emit flash," she wrote.
"Enough to jolt.
Don't worry, just a brat who needs a lesson." I sat in the courtroom, listening to that sentence read aloud, and I remember thinking, there it is. All the years of silent jabs, of Beatrice brushing off her daughter's meanness, had finally crystallized into something unmistakably monstrous. The civil court ruled swiftly $780,000 in damages assigned to Marlene, $240,000 to Beatrice. Every cent went directly into a protected fund for Celeste's future, college, counseling, living expenses. Their bank accounts were frozen. Liens were placed on their properties. Future wages would be garnished until the judgment was paid in full. Neither of them had the means to pay, which meant they'd be living in debt for decades. That was never the goal, but it was justice.
Not revenge. Not cruelty. Simply balance restored. Marlene's criminal trial followed 3 weeks later.
The courtroom was filled with new faces, jurors, press, curious citizens. I sat with Lorraine and Celeste, who insisted on being there for the opening statements. I looked at her, 14 years old, quiet but fierce, her hand steady in mine. "I need to hear what they say," she whispered. The trial lasted 4 days. Witnesses testified. Doctors explained the seizure.
The electronics technician described how he was misled.
Our family therapist spoke about Celeste's nightmares, her new anxiety around gifts and family events.
Marlene did not take the stand.
In closing, the prosecutor looked directly at the jury.
"Justice does not mean vengeance," she said. "It means acknowledging harm. It means protecting the vulnerable.
This child was targeted by someone she trusted.
This cannot be ignored."
The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours.
Guilty on all counts.
The sentence, 6 years in a state correctional facility.
There was no dramatic outburst. No apology.
Marlene stood, face blank, as the verdict was read. When she was led away in cuffs, I felt only stillness.
No elation. No relief. Just a quiet finality.
Beatrice, who sat at the very back of the courtroom during the trial, stood as the doors closed behind her daughter and walked out without a word. That night, Lorraine, Celeste, and I sat on the balcony of our condo. It was late March, still cold, but something about the silence was peaceful.
"Is it really over?" Celeste asked. "It's over," I said. Lorraine looked at me. "No more surprises?" "No more surprises," I repeated.
And for the first time in months, I believed it. It has been 9 months since the day Marlene handed Celeste that gift.
9 months since flashing lights turned a birthday celebration into a trauma. Since we sat in hospital chairs gripping each other's hands, waiting for answers. Since our family, what we thought was family, was unmade by truth.
People talk about closure as if it's a door you can lock behind you, but in reality, it's more like weathering a storm.
You don't emerge untouched. The windows rattle. The roof might leak. Some parts of you are never quite the same.
But when the sky clears and you step outside, blinking in the light, what you find is resilience.
Celeste has grown in ways I wish she didn't have to. Therapy helped.
So did time, quiet routines, and the steady, unshakable love Lorraine and I tried to wrap around her like insulation.
She went back to school.
She picked up her sketchbook again. Her drawings, once full of whimsy, now had layers, textures that spoke of depth and discovery. She never wore bracelets after that. But for her 15th birthday, Lorraine and I gave her a small silver necklace, a music note charm, plain and gentle.
She wears it every day.
Lorraine has remained my anchor. Through every court hearing, every late-night worry, she held fast. We took a long vacation in early summer, just the three of us. We went to the Oregon coast, rented a small cabin near the water, and did nothing but walk, draw, and breathe.
For the first time in what felt like forever, we laughed without the edge of fatigue. It felt like beginning again. As for me, I've changed too. I delegate more at work now.
I used to believe my value was tied to output, to how many hours I spent solving problems.
Now I understand it's the quality of attention that matters. And the attention I give my family is no longer divided.
We started a Friday tradition: homemade pizza, old movies, no phones.
It sounds simple, and it is. But it's the kind of simplicity you earn.
Marlene remains incarcerated. Her lawyer filed an appeal, but it was dismissed.
Beatrice still lives alone in a subsidized apartment across the city. She sent 2 letters.
The first was full of excuses. The second was quieter, almost empty.
I didn't reply to either. We secured permanent restraining orders. They are not allowed within 500 feet of our home, Celeste's school, or our offices. Any attempt to reach us will be met with legal action. That boundary is not cruel. It's necessary.
Some friends, well-meaning, I'm sure, have suggested I'll feel better if I forgive them. They say things like, "But she's your sister," or "Your mother probably regrets it." I've learned to nod without responding.
Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't something you do to make others comfortable. And it isn't owed. Especially not when the harm was deliberate. What people fail to understand is that justice and peace are not opposites.
Sometimes, they are the same. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones who harm you, peace begins where accountability does. I still think about what Marlene said during her confession, that she wanted to break what she couldn't have. That sentence circles me sometimes like wind around a building. She couldn't bear the sight of a happy, healthy family because it reminded her of what she thought she deserved. And instead of building her own, she tried to destroy mine.
But she failed. We are still standing. Not just intact, but stronger.
Lorraine recently got promoted to a higher director role. Celeste was accepted into a summer art program.
And I started mentoring younger engineers, something I never had the bandwidth for before.
Passing forward what I've learned feels like laying down anchors in other lives, strengthening what holds us up.
One evening, a former colleague asked me, "Do you ever think you'll reconnect with them? Down the line?" I thought about that question. About what people mean when they say family. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Who protects you.
Who sees your whole self and chooses to stay.
It's not obligation. It's choice.
I looked at him and said, "We already have the family we need.
And it's unbreakable." Epilogue.
Celeste turned 15 last month. We celebrated quietly, just the three of us, with dinner at her favorite Italian place and a walk by the lake. She smiled as we sang to her, and when we gave her the necklace, her eyes lit up in that old familiar way. That night, after she went to bed, Lorraine and I sat out on the balcony. The city stretched out below, full of light and life.
"You think she'll be okay?" Lorraine asked softly. "She already is," I said. And I meant it.
Because we've seen what it means to rebuild. Because we know what it takes to protect what matters. And because no matter how carefully someone tries to fracture what you've built, when it's built with love, it holds. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.